All you need right now is...
I need a coffee.
Ed Service is a musician and DJ originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Since moving to Melbourne about 15 years ago, he's juggled his creative practice with day jobs that reflect his personal interest in arts infrastructure and community engagement. In 2021, Ed's career trajectory took a rather unexpected turn. A song that he'd made with his mate Jack years earlier started climbing the charts worldwide. Love Tonight was a sleeper hit. It eventually went platinum in many countries, including the United States, the UK, and across Europe. All of a sudden, SHOUSE had transformed from a fun bedroom project into a legit global EDM duo. Collabs with David Guetta and Jason Derulo followed, gigs at Paris Fashion Week and through the US and Europe, and of course, Ibiza. How did two blokes from Brunswick end up as EDM DJs? Well, I'm actually less interested in that than I am in what they're doing now. With the dust settling, Ed and Jack have returned to Melbourne determined to re-engage with music at the community level. That's where they come from. That's what they care about. So I sat down with Ed to ask him whether becoming a low-key EDM superstar has changed the way that he thinks about music, and to learn a bit more about the deep thinking that guides his own creative practice and is guiding what SHOUSE are doing next. Why make music? I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land where this conversation took place. This was recorded live, our very first live event, but definitely not our last. 20 friends came together in October 2024 at North Melbourne Community Centre to listen to this conversation. Often for these chats, it's good to start with a bit of an origin story.
Sure.
Ed Service.
Yes.
That can't be your real name.
It is.
Service.
Yes, service. It's a rare one. Apparently it's from the French cervas, which is like beer, which suggests
beer,
perhaps...
How'd you say? What?
Yeah, cerveza in Spanish is beer, and I think cerveza in French is similar. Yeah, I will be wrong on that. But
I was thinking it was like to be of service, that you were a servant of the people. Or...
Yes, that's how I like to think of it too.
But it's just beer.
You can read into how you will.
Beer.
But I think our ancestors were maybe pub owners in France at some point.
Right.
Maybe. But it is a rare one, but it's a real name, yeah.
Okay.
The only one in the phone book in New Zealand was my family and my uncle.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm from Aotearoa, New Zealand originally, and I moved to Melbourne 15 odd years ago.
Right. Okay. So as an adult or as a young?
Yeah, I was 21.
Okay.
I moved with my girlfriend at the time to Melbourne because my mate had been here and said it was cool.
Yeah.
And Wellington was feeling a bit small.
Where does music enter your life? Like even before making music as a kid, what are your memories?
Going to church, and Catholic church in Upper Hutt, Aotearoa, was probably my first memories of singing together with people, and the distinct ones is with my siblings, 4 siblings, doing the dishes after dinner, and like we had a CD player and everyone got to put on like 2 songs each while we cleaned. And that was Lauryn Hill mixed with like, Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys era. Yeah, it was, you know, there was, each kid had their own records they were proud to bring to the table. What
were your unique obsessions at the time?
I was kind of into punk music and stuff.
What, as a kid?
As a young kid, I can't actually remember. Yeah, I was as a young kid, I was just listening to what my siblings were putting on. And then when I became of musical age, I thought like NoFX and stuff was cool. And There's some more embarrassing ones that I won't mention.
Okay. Green Day?
Yeah, and then that was the new metal era. So I won't name names, but yeah, I was there.
You won't be alone. New metal's come up many times already on this podcast.
But there's no need mentioning those bands. I think they're fine.
Shout out Sunk Loto. Well, you probably didn't get Sunk Loto in New Zealand.
No, I mean, my dad really loved like Irish folk music.
Oh wow!
And he loved like American folk music and country music, like James Taylor, and he just played a lot of. Artist Lisa O'Neill came into our life at a certain point, who I really love today. But there's always music playing.
Yeah.
My sisters loved, there's like the Fugees, De La Soul, Lauryn Hill, and then, Beyonce, and yeah.
When did you start making music?
Destiny's Child.
Oh.
Yeah.
What about making music? When did you start?
I just started playing guitar and when I was like 16, 17, and then got into kind of computer music and making music on computers. And then really in Melbourne though, I really kind of found a really supportive scene about 10 years ago of kind of DIY when this kind of electronic crossover was happening in Melbourne. It seemed that bands were like learning how to use synths and drum machines or computers, and there was all these kind of experimental electronic bands. And I was dating a member of the Tantrums, and she showed me how to use Ableton. And it was an interesting scene that Jack and I had a band with my friend Tony called Io, which made kind of cosmic, spacey dance music. He played sax and I did beats on the computer and we looped the sax and lots of delays. And we didn't really know what dance music was, but we kind of were making a version of it. It wasn't very danceable. But that was a particular moment in Melbourne, I think, with like a lot of experimental DIY electronic acts.
Yeah.
And
is that like Two Bright Lakes era?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Although most of those artists were kind of at the older end of that spectrum, I would say.
Yeah, okay.
There was, Oscar Kisang and Oscar Martin and the Tantrums and heaps of bands that was kind of before everyone became DJs,
Yeah.
And like bands were doing electronic-ish experimentation.
Yep.
And it was just a special time.
How many of those artists are DJs now, aside from you and Jack?
Or like not doing music. Yeah.
Or not doing music. Everyone either became an EDM DJ or is not doing music.
95%. Yeah, we're the 1% that became EDM DJs probably. Most people have not do music anymore, I would say, because it's so hard to make money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In that time, so you're playing in bands and you're part of a sort of a scene in Melbourne.
Yeah.
What's your day job at that time?
I worked for Kent Street Bar in Collingwood for a long time, and I worked as a removalist for the Little Red Trucks and the Friendly Movie Men for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And just odd jobs, yeah. I reckon I've worked.
And were you studying at the same time?
Eventually, I came to study urban planning, Masters of Urban Planning at RMIT. I did political science undergraduate in Wellington, and eventually moved into working for Moreland, now Merribek Council, in arts infrastructure, and then at Collingwood Yards, did the transformation of that from an abandoned TAFE building into like this kind of arts precinct now. So I worked there for 5 years.
Yeah.
Before music took over, or came back into my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where did you have an interest specifically in arts infrastructure and urban planning, or is it just more that's where you ended up?
Yeah, I have an interest in how cities are organised to allow or disallow, or how they organise themselves to enable creativity and, expression and scenes to develop, and why some areas are cool and some areas are not cool, and then issues like what cool means, that like things are expensive and, gentrification and all that. But I was just interested in why some cities are creative and create musical scenes and artistic scenes and some don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I think, space for creating art is kind of the answer to that. Affordable space to make art, or cheap land, basically.
Interesting. Like, so you really...
Good one.
They're onto you.
Yeah. Can't talk about that. Yeah.
It's interesting because like that's a vast topic in itself. Like what makes a city a creative city, but you feel like you've really narrowed down onto make affordable spaces.
You've got to make a choice to something to focus on. And to me, I think affordable workspace is very important. It's often not talked about much. We talk about affordable housing, which is obviously critical, but we don't talk much about affordable space to work in. And if you've got a high rent, basically you need to produce commodities that you can sell for a high price so you can pay your rent, right?
Yep.
If you have a low rent or no rent, you can kind of do anything. So land value forces capitalist imperatives on people.
Yeah.
You know, and I think capitalist imperatives are at odds with art making.
Yes, agreed. With music at the moment in the 21st century, especially, like a lot of people are just making music at home. They don't need a studio or they feel like they don't need, they can't afford. Yeah. Like so there's a lot of artists I think have just internalized that mentality of like, well, I can't afford a studio and I can just do it on my laptop in my bedroom, so I will just do that. Do you think music and the way it functions in our city, for example, would change if simply artists had access to spaces? Even artists who might be even sitting in this room thinking, I don't really need a space.
Look, I think the bedroom producer development is amazing, and it's really enabled a lot of people to make music who never would otherwise, but it has also created a particular type of music making which is alone. And I think I've come to realize for myself at least, and I think for a lot of people, that the point of music is to communicate and to create things with other people. And I think that if you have spaces where people can make music together with other people, bump into other people, and exchange musicality, that changes everything about the music, you know? It changes the politics of the music, changes what you're saying, and it changes the feelings you create with each other and other people. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I think the development of this bedroom producer thing, which I have been in the past, and I love, and it's really fun, don't get me wrong, and I think and you can make beautiful art from your own mind, but I actually think the point of music is to make music with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of the way that music functions at the moment is essentially creating a generation of musicians that have internalized being alone and have kind of gotten used to it.
And it's this kind of mentality of the gig worker, you know, working from home, making beats, you know, and then you send them to Spotify and they may get popular, they may not. Whereas music used to be about people talking to each other with music. Yeah.
And I reckon now I see a circumstance where artists realize that they're isolated and they want to be part of communities, but they can't figure out how to do that or where they are. And then they feel bad. They feel like it's their fault.
100%.
You know what I mean?
But the spaces kind of don't exist. It's just either go to a bar or, which are, a fewer and far between, I guess, venues. And the gig scene isn't what it was, at least for my peer group. I think we need a lot more spaces where people can but you know, also that having the time to hang out and not work all the time and not need to make money to make rent for etc. It's tricky.
Yep.
Yeah. But so I guess that's my point. Affordable workspace and affordable conditions, and often it goes along with government incentives. And you know, so many art scenes have sprung out of welfare, basically. You know, or artist checks and artists stipends and stuff. And
recently had a great chat with Dr. Sam Whiting, who is an academic and a musician. He's a bass player, who specialises on small live music venues as an infrastructure, and what they bring to cities and how they support scenes. And but it came up in our conversation, this idea of welfare in the past having facilitated waves of innovation in Australian music. And he pointed out the 80s and 90s. That, you know, often we talk about the 90s in the context of this alternative movement that emerged from Britpop and grunge. and
Yes.
Australia kind of professionalising Triple J nationaling. But there's another part of that story where just a lot of musicians were on the dole, you know, and they were living on the margins, but they also had a lot of time to
and the rent was
skill up.
cheap.
Yeah.
And there was a warehouse they could squat in or just make music in down the road.
Yeah.
And from that emerges, I don't know why, but I keep going back to Britain and their particular funding period where you had Brian Eno and Blur and Pulp and these kind of things, and they now represent iconically British, and they're massive commodities for the country if you need an economic justification. That just creating the space and having the creative infrastructure to support that way of that practice has resulted in legendary artists or whatever, even though that's kind of a problematic term, I think. But urban planning for me is a way of thinking about the politics and politics and people in 3 dimensions, concrete form, and thinking about things like creative infrastructure being the venues and the studios and the radio stations, Triple R and PBS, for example, here, a kind of that radio infrastructure, or what would you call it, network, is, so profound.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons
And
Melbourne's
rare.
such a great city and creative city and musical city as compared to places like Sydney, which is also great, don't get me wrong, but was our community radio stations, and particularly before the internet, how that would hold communities together just through the radio waves. It's pretty cool. But anyway, thinking about different modes of infrastructure, creative infrastructure, as more than just but it does go with public transport and trains and roads and cycling and walking and all that as well. That's what urban planning did for me. And then thinking about creative ecologies and et cetera, for me, it was a helpful way to think about stuff.
Jason Derulo.
Yeah.
People are going to be shocked at how quickly we pivot this conversation
Sure,
from government policy, arts infrastructure to Jason Derulo.
Yeah.
So this isn't even 10 years ago, right? You're working on Collingwood Yards as a project. You're interested in arts infrastructure and urban planning. You're playing in bands.
Yeah, I was. I kind of stopped doing music.
Yeah. You stopped doing music entirely?
Not entirely. I was still tinkering around and stuff, but stopped kind of chasing this idea of being a successful artist.
Yeah.
And was happy with my career in, creative infrastructure.
And you and your mate Jack
Yes.
make some dance music.
We made a song in 2017 that became a huge international global hit during the pandemic, and 2021, when we're working full time. And long story short, we quit our jobs and now we're DJs. And we weren't really DJs. We just made a song that was kind of dance music adjacent. I mean, it's a dance song, but we're not really from dance music communities, to be honest. We just loved drum machines and synths, and we made a 4/4 beat and got a choir on it, a choir of our friends to sing. Yeah. A big song, captured a beautiful moment, and that resonated with the world. And we had the opportunity during lockdown in Melbourne to fly. We got an offer out of the blue, to get 100,000 euros to fly to Paris Fashion Week and play the steps of the Opera Garnier for a lingerie show with BMX cyclists and an orchestra, and from Melbourne lockdown when you couldn't even go to your friend's house for dinner, and we had to get special government permission to go, and we did, and it was quite surreal. It was very weird.
Was that when you were I might have to quit my job now?
Yeah, it was hard to say no to.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to stay here in winter in Melbourne lockdown, or do you want to go to Paris Fashion Week?
Yeah.
It's hard to say no, but I mean, it was also it was such a relief to have a full-time job after a decade of trying to do music and odd jobs and get paycheck to paycheck, and finally being all right, fuck it, I'll make music for fun, but now my mum's proud of me. I've got a job and a progressive career, and I've got a salary. Yeah. So it still was hard, despite the how beguiling that offer is.
Yeah.
And it was weird, it was fun, but it was so weird. And then all these DJ shows we played across Europe were pretty weird,
Right.
In Poland and France and Germany. The song resonated with so many people in so many ways that was so alien from our community that we made it with in Brunswick. And with our way of thinking about music, you know, there's definitely some conflict in values and still is, but, you know.
Yeah. It's a very rare thing, but it does sometimes happen. You make a song in your context and then like you almost fall through a crack in the universe and suddenly you're in pop music world.
You've got some experience of that.
I have some experience of doing that with, with a friend, with Gautier. Yeah.
It's so weird, right? And it's hard to, particularly coming straight out of a lockdown, you know, 2 years of you can't see anyone and then you're going all around Europe and playing to these places, like not good places, I think.
Right.
You know.
And how long was that period? That's a couple of years. Because I remember I was watching it from afar, from Melbourne, where I was doing my radio show, and it was a highlight for me just seeing where in the world you were and what crazy beach you were DJing at, and is David Guetta there, and you know, like it was to see and to know, even though like I knew you guys. I sort of knew of you guys more than knowing you personally at the time, but I knew you maybe well enough. And hearing you describe that period of time in Melbourne, like
you
confirms the
for us, like.
Yeah, I knew that you were not those guys necessarily, and so it was really interesting to see.
Yeah,
like,
we didn't even know how to DJ, you know, and we just had to like learn on the road, and we still don't. I don't really think of myself as like a DJ, you know, but we were played at clubs in Ibiza a few months ago. Yeah. So yeah, it still happens. We still go, but it's got progressively better, and we've become more comfortable with compartmentalizing that part of our musicality and our job now. You know. Yeah. And we've got more used to it, and I think better ways to think about it and do it. But yeah, we still tour Europe. We did this year, and we might next year. I don't know if people still want to hear that song. And you know, we're making new songs, but we're kind of just trying to milking a dead horse, you know.
Beautiful imagery. So you say a bit of a conflict in values.
Yeah.
Can you expand a bit on that? And,
sure.
You know,
nightclubs in places that can often be like, many nightclubs are kind of filled with latent kind of, I guess, like a dark energy of like, you know, capitalist commodified consumption of alcohol. The club owner's trying to make as much money as possible. A lot of drunk, weird dudes around, kind of some latent misogyny and stuff, and like, you know, Poland and stuff. In particular, my mind goes to nothing against Poland, but there was this particular moment or two in the first tour, and you're just playing at these hyper commercial clubs, and you're taking a big check, but nothing about the experience felt musical or connected to anything real. Yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of the conflict in values.
And you're going to feel that even more deeply because of your experience in Melbourne at these community level events.
Yeah, and it's. But then there's the other end of that spectrum is, you know, a cool underground club, or not even underground, just a nice. Yeah, it's just like it's fuzzy, you know, and some things can be really beautiful and gorgeous, and you meet real people, and you do have a genuine musical exchange, and other ones can just feel like total commodified. Dancing for Hitler, Jack said, which I think is a bit of an overstatement, but it's a bit hyperbolic. But yeah, dancing for the devil perhaps is a bit, it's just like, but you know, jobs are always that to some varying degree, I think. Not always, but often. Yeah, and it's, if you want to make money in music, you have to. Yeah. I think. Did you meet some EDM DJs who you might have had expectations about, but they sort of surprised you? Like, because I imagine you wouldn't be the only people that are kind of accidentally thrust into that world. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's pretty rare. Yeah. Okay. We met some nice people. Most of the big guys would say met my expectations, and it was like there weren't many role models in that scene, you know, where you're like, oh, there's someone who's happy and satisfied and incredibly fulfilled, and a lot of them are just kind of infected with this psychosis of like making money and big songs and bigger crowds and being they want to be DJ Mag #1 DJ, and they're very fake, a lot of these people and a lot of these interactions. But then there is some really gorgeous, beautiful people too. And I'm not talking about the music scene, to be clear. I'm not talking about all DJs. I'm talking about the the pinnacle of the commercial DJ dance music scene.
Right.
I think underneath that, there's so many beautiful festivals and events and community-driven things. And I know friends that play these and have really genuine, authentic musical exchanges, and I think they're great. But yeah, but it doesn't happen much at the peaky peak. Yeah.
There's a version of this where you and Jack have access to that world and that experience, and you do decide, oh, we want to make hits, we want to make as much money as possible, and you sort of, you know, often these mindsets, if you're surrounded by it, you can't help but sort of go in that direction. What inoculated you guys from going
against
down that path?
Yeah, good question. I think, you know, Melbourne, and I think Jack in particular grew up in folk music communities out western Victoria, and it ran very contrary to these kind of like, you know, few hundred people kind of folk festivals where you're all playing music together. To him, it was particularly abhorrent. And being together, I think we worked out to have a resistance to that. And I'm very glad, because now our plan is, you know, we'll try and make hits and try and make money to reinvest back in authentic musical experiences here, and hopefully providing some of that creative infrastructure for other people to participate in. So, you know, steal from the rich and give to Melbourne, maybe.
Yeah.
That is kind of our goal now. And, you know, we have learned how to make peace with a lot of these experiences over there and have fun and kind of hopefully be, if not saboteurs, although we'd like to be eventually, you know, complicit critique, and hopefully make some music that speaks to that a bit.
Ben Lee called it calm and compassionate game playing, which he said was a philosophy he'd internalized after reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Say that again. No.
Calm and compassionate game playing.
Nice.
Ben was interesting because he spoke a lot about
game playing,
you know,
I like that.
working in capitalist systems, working inside the system, being literate.
You've got to see it as a game. Not everything's a game, but like those things, I think that's smart. There's actually a book called Infinite Games that I read. I can't remember the name of the author, but it's all about, the problem would be if you invest your heart and your soul in that career, because, it's hollow, I think, a lot of that world. Yeah. But smart, playing the game smart. It's like still a privilege to have that as a job. Like, it's amazing, don't get me wrong.
I'm just going to check the time because my screen's gone black, so I can't. Oh, 9:33.
Well, there we go.
Good. We're good.
Yeah.
Well, I need to thank you and Jack for introducing me to this concept of communitas. In fact, I've got the book. I bought the book.
Yes,
because I was so excited after
There's more
talking to you guys.
books to get as well.
There's more books?
Yeah.
So this is the book. I'll hold it up for everybody. It's called Communitas, The Anthropology of Collective Joy by Edith Turner. Do you feel confident talking a little bit about Edith and who she was? Her and Victor?
Yeah, Edith and Victor Turner were, and I don't want to get anything wrong, but Victor Turner in particular was an anthropologist, and he worked with communities around the world. I think, I'm not sure precisely where in Africa, maybe it was Tanzania, but he was a guy looking into social functions and how societies organize themselves and how they behave. And he came up with this theory of communitas, which is a way to understand rituals and community rituals and what role they play in a society. And he talked about the state of communitas, which is reached when, and I'll butcher this explanation, but when a community, essentially when a community experiences a dissolving of hierarchies, when we get into a state of communion, when our roles in society dissolve, the norms and the functions of societies dissolve, and we kind of all share the same plane for a brief moment in time. And there's a way to understand what societies all around the world have these different rituals of transcendence, of dance, of song, and different ways of coming together. And communitas was this state that he argued societies need to reach from time to time to kind of understand that we have created this society is created by us, you know?
Yeah.
And to kind of more understand our roles, we need to, from time to time, dissolve our roles. And Edith, after Victor Turner died, Edith took that concept and really ran a lot further with it, and looked into this idea of the way that communitas functions in many different ways in modern society. But the way Jack and I like to think about it is it's when a community comes together and does something together, you know?
Yeah.
And for us, that's collective music making and collective dance. When you can lose yourself in the crowd, happens at dance parties, can happen at raves, particularly can happen in big choirs. Yeah.
The lose yourself part of it, I
Yep.
think, is what resonated with me.
Yeah, and
because it is essentially like there are two anthropologists who are they're recognizing a phenomena, a very human, basic phenomena, and that doesn't have a word. And so
Yes,
they're inventing, well, not inventing, but sort of applying this word to it, which is that feeling that as musicians or music lovers, we most readily recognize it maybe when we sing together in a choir or we're at a gig surrounded by a couple of hundred people. And that feeling of when you're so immersed in a collective experience that it no longer really matters what your job is or
Yes.
who you are, and you walk away from that feeling a little bit transformed
Yeah.
and a little bit reconnected.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't literally
It's a
connected to
temporary-
everybody in the
yeah.
room, you've felt a physical feeling.
And a dissolution of the structure of your normal life,
Yes.
you know?
Yep.
Where you just forget about your normal life completely for a few moments, or your normal role, your normal job.
Yep.
And then you can better go back to it because you understand that because it's so easy to get so wrapped up in our different roles in society to think that they're real, you know, when actually they're constructed. And it's important to recognize that they're constructed to play them better and with more compassion and empathy, you know? Yeah. So for me, it was a really illuminating concept because I always kept coming back to the question of like, you know, why is music important? Why is dancing in big groups important? You know, it's not just, and I think the explanation of, letting off some steam, you know, on the weekend so you can go back to work, or hedonism and all those explanations, I think are not enough, you know, then they fall short, and that's not what it is. And I think it's something much more profound and, you know, critical for societies to function.
Yeah, it's interesting. Or even like just describing like going to a rave as being letting off steam and then going back to your job. It's you're almost there. You're so close to it actually in terms of describing it. Is that, you know, I think something that resonated with me in the book is this idea of like the experience of communitas that's actually a little bit closer to real life than what most of us spend most of our time doing in real
100%.
life. But also, so I would recommend the book for anyone who's curious about this. But I love that music is only one chapter. So in fact, it's only half a chapter in this book where they talk about music and sport together as these collective experiences, both as performers, you know, athletes and musicians, of that feeling of being in the zone and losing yourself in a collective musical experience or in a sports team and what that feels like, but also quote unquote audiences.
Yes.
But some of the other chapters are equally fascinating.
Yeah.
Like the communitas of, I mean, I'll read a few of them out. The communitas of disaster, for example, is an amazing breakdown of what happens post events like Hurricane Katrina, for example, is one example in the book.
Yeah.
Talking about these are tragic events, but what emerges in these communities in the immediate aftermath is, again, a dissolution of hierarchy.
Yeah.
A reminder of everyone's shared humanity, and people generally will go to each other and will help each other and will connect and be transformed and then potentially live the rest of their lives differently, having gone through an experience like that. I think reading this, and those chapters are right next to each other more or less in the book, right? So it's kind of like, as musicians, you don't always embed your practice with that elevated sense of purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's often we're told that to be an artist is to express yourself and to kind of to process a thing you're going through, or it's to build a career and get streams and make money.
It.
But this idea that to be a musician could be to facilitate these broader moments of communitas for people that desperately need it.
Yeah.
That's a really worthy sense of purpose.
Exactly. And that, I guess, is why I was so stoked when I found it, because it was searching for that. Why do I think this is so much more important than just expressing myself or making commodities to be sold so people can have fun? You know, it's actually about an essential, eternal transcendence that humans have been accessing forever. And that's another interesting take, is another book called Dancing in the Streets by Barbara Eichenreich. I'm probably, mangling her last name. But it talks about these technologies of collective joy, of which one is music and dance is basically the main two ones. And, societies of humans have been using these forever, and probably before we had the spoken word, and definitely before we had the written word. And, it's helpful to think of these technologies that allow us to transcend together and experience collective joy, and the function that plays in society and keeping us happy. Like, she argues that depression largely comes from a lack of collective joy, that's her argument. Mm-hmm. She talks about this wave in Europe after Carnival was cancelled. Carnival was banned across Europe, and then there was a huge emergence of depression. Right. Anyway, it's drawing a long bow, but I think it's a pretty cool theory. Anyway, these technologies of collective joy, or communitas, I think it's the same thing. She does refer to that. But, if we don't have the spaces and the time and the places to do it, we have less and less of it in our lives, and that has a negative function, Like, some places you can never achieve it,
Well, speaking of that, do you think communitas, by your reading of it, does it have to occur in real life? Is it by definition an embodied experience? Is being part of a virtual community ever going to get you to that place?
For me, no, I don't think so. I mean, look, I'm sure to some degree, but for me, I think it's about sharing physical space with people, and sharing physical movements, and sharing, particles, even like sharing the same air, and sharing the vibrations, and sharing time together. Because actually these books help to explain something that I was thinking about a lot with dancing and dance music, is I think the purpose is kind of just to share time together, because we're all in our separate kind of temporal ways of understanding the world and understanding time specifically. And if you've got a meter or a tempo or a kick drum, it enables you to be in time together and also physically move in time together for prolonged periods, and it creates a synchronicity, literally. So it's not my field, the virtual digital communities and digital experiences of communitas. I hope you can, because it would be give a lot more access for people. But I'm definitely focused on physical people being together in space. And I think we all discovered how much we value that after the pandemic. And we just did a artwork for Rising Festival, Jack and I, SHOUSE, at St. Paul's Cathedral. We had 1,000 people in there singing and dancing and moving, and it was so transcendental. It was astonishing, really. And a lot of people who went said a lot of quotes you might find in that book, but not knowing anything about it. It was very embodied. You just feel it, Yep. So, I don't know. What do you think about digital experience?
am coming around to the idea that we need to be in each other's physical auras more. Totally. But I think the virtual communities do provide access to people who don't have it. Yep. And I think that loneliness and isolation are deep, deep issues, particularly in Western countries. And so if virtual communities provide a stepping stone for people out of that loneliness or out of their mental health situation, then I think that's good. But I think my personal take is starting to be virtual communities need to be a stepping stone towards being in a real place with some real people. But to just say the internet is like it's 100 or 1,000 different things, right?
Sure.
So like some spaces, like some Discord servers can be really beautiful, and some podcast communities can be beautiful. Some Discord servers are insanely toxic. Some there's corners of social media platforms that are beautiful. Then there's other giant chunks of them that are
They're
horrible.
nice, but it's not the same as being in a space with.
And I think part
heaps
of
people.
there is a commercial imperative from all of those platforms to convince people that it's enough for them to spend time in the virtual platforms, and to kind of give them the illusion or a sort of to supplement communitas or in-person connection with a thing that's close enough to it that you'll spend more time on the
simulation
platform
of it.
than in real
and that's the
life.
other thing. You're on all these people's platforms all the time, you know. Just experiencing communitas through Instagram.
Yeah, I'm not so sure.
Nah, I don't think so.
I don't think so. So let's talk more about this event. Was putting it on at St Paul's Cathedral, which is arguably one of the most iconic religious spaces in Melbourne. No coincidence, I'm guessing.
Of course, no. Churches were originally sites of transcendence, and sites for the technology of achieving collective joy. There's an argument that Christianity comes from Dionysian rituals in ancient Rome and Greece, and those were rituals of people singing and dancing together till transcendence, and then it used to happen in churches, and then when the development of organised religion and power hierarchies within churches, it was banned because it was too powerful, because you didn't want people to access God themselves. They needed to access God through the priest or whatever. And that's evidenced by when the colonisers came to Australia and came all around the world, the first thing they would ban would be the language, the song and the dance, because these are actual technologies of political collectivization and togetherness. It's a force against colonialism, Anyway, these churches were sites of transcendence, and, they're built to be reverberant and feel godly, through sound. It was not a coincidence. And this space, I think, we brought it back to a site of real transcendence. It was amazing. It sounds so good in there. Yeah. And feels so good, despite all its layers of, weird Protestant heritage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there is still a lot of sensitivity around this because of people's experiences of religion in different ways in the last 100 years, in the last 1,000 years. But it does feel that we're missing something in a secular society.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Like religion, I think, had so many, organised religion obviously has so many issues, which we're all aware of, don't need to go into, but it played a role in society. I remember my mum used to say to me, we went to Catholic church, we were not particularly Catholic or dogmatic, and I'm not, but Mum said we would go there to sing with people every week, to sing with your community every week, and then hang out and chat afterward, have a cup of tea and go home. And with that gone, there's nothing that replaces that, Like I was saying, everything is now consumption. Are you going to the mall to buy stuff, or you're going to a bar to drink stuff, or you're going somewhere to watch someone do something? When do we ever have space to come and do something together that's not related to capitalism or consumption or making someone money? Nowhere. Anyway, right? Can you think of anything?
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So religion played a role, I think, in society of coming together, of communitas, some version of it, and we need to create new religions, I guess. I don't know, but new spaces for that. Yeah, for that type of activity, collective doing, and that's not dictated by money, which is so hard. Like I was saying, particularly in places like Melbourne, where land value is so high and everything is dictated by increasing land value and paying people's rents. How do you do it and where do you do it? Yeah, it's a good question.
I was recently very fortunate to be invited to a artist climate leadership retreat with a bunch of artists talking about, part of what we did was we brainstormed what can we do to raise awareness around climate activism or to rally musicians, and I mentioned communitas, which is an idea that when you describe it to musicians, you don't have to really explain it.
No, exactly.
And they're just like, oh, I know what that is. Thanks for that word. That's good.
Yeah.
But the other thing I brought up somewhat sheepishly, because I was nervous that everyone was going to ridicule it, was this idea of a climate church, which is not my idea, but it's a thing that's come up a bit I've seen it written in books and people theorize it as being a thing that might happen in the next 50 years, where you've got a bunch of people wanting to make change on climate and also needing connection and community, and they start coming together to have like church-like services where the sermon is not religious. It's about how to be a good human and how to integrate back in with the planet. But there's music and there's joy, there's communitas. And I was surprised by how receptive everyone in the room was to an idea like that.
Yeah.
Like a secular
I love it.
Climate church.
Yeah, I love it.
You want to start a church?
I mean, kind of, yeah. Jack and I we just bought a warehouse up in Brunswick.
Yeah, tell us about that.
It's a big space. When I first moved to Melbourne 15 years ago, I lived in warehouses for like $50 a week rent, all across Brunswick, which are now all big apartment buildings. And, at the time, there was crazy level of creative practice in Brunswick, all like really weird stuff and like really good stuff and everything in between. And 95% of that's been rezoned and is now apartment buildings. And it was kind of always a dream to kind of be able to lock down some of that affordable workspace, particularly in Brunswick, just because I've got a personal connection with it. And, we luckily were able to get some Love Tonight money together and put a deposit down on this warehouse that was just buried up off Tinning Street in Brunswick. And we're building a studio there, and we want to build a space for all this kind of stuff to happen in that we've been talking about. It's not the perfect space for it, but it's a great place to workshop and get together and not have any financial imperatives. We don't want to make money from this place, you know. We don't have a business plan, but we want to facilitate creativity and we want to facilitate communitas. And I don't know, maybe a church service could be part of that. I'm not going to be the priest and, I'm not going to create the religion, but I think coming together and singing is just a great way to start.
Yeah.
Who knows what will come from it. We also regularly get choir sessions together, as Fran would know. It really helped us with that a lot, because we get choir sessions because our songs are choir songs, we've come to understand. And we've been doing them in the studio in Collingwood, which has been really beautiful. And we get together have been getting together relatively regularly, but now we've got our own space. We want to do that very regularly and open it more and more and more. And we're trying to kind of blur the lines between recording, performance, and having fun, and partying and like dancing to the music while you're recording it, because I think often there's this bifurcation into like this pristine recorded commodity of music that needs to be perfectly captured in a white cube and to create this perfect commodity to sell to Spotify. Whereas, the recorded music is a relatively recent phenomenon, and the whole idea of locking this perfect song into a perfect form, I think does a disservice to music, which is supposed to be alive and fun and human and real. So, we want to create this space, this kind of blend between a studio and a venue and a clubhouse to hang out at, and maybe a little church in a warehouse kind of thing. Yeah. So anyone listening to this or here who's needs some space to do something in, just hit us up, and that's what we're going to be there for. Just getting started, but yeah.
Except for when you're in Ibiza.
Yeah, we'll give the keys to someone. But
look after the warehouse. I'm off to.
Actually, we will need someone to water the plants. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing that we've been able to lock a little bit of land down because the same old story always happens. There's cool new things open up, and then they're turning it into apartments, and there's little things happening over here, and they're going to knock it down. So we won't be doing that, and at least for a few decades, we can see what we can create.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the point is we don't have, despite what I just said, like precise plans for it.
Yep.
The idea is not to have a plan for it and just have a big empty space, and because that's quite rare, and let things play out. Yeah.
Well, you'll have to come back for an update. Once
Yeah,
it's all up and running.
100%. Yeah. But we will be doing this communitas event again and again and again and again, and hopefully we'll get bigger. And we want to involve so many. What we really liked from the last one at the town hall was we had different musical communities. We had like our choir, and then we had the Marybeck Horn Band came and played, and they were amazing. And we're trying to involve different musical communities to have their moments there. And it's kind of like a end of year school concert when every class kind of plays a little bit, but we're all playing together and dancing. And we want it to get just so big that everyone in Melbourne can come and have their moment to shine, or just be a part of the, crowd, the communitas, the organism. Yeah.
Well, Ed, thanks. It's been a great chat.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Round of applause for Mr. Ed Service.
And for Tim.
Mr. Beer. Mr. Beer.
I guess so, yeah. Maybe I'll change that explanation.